Hey teachers, if you want some strategies for implementing historical writing into your classroom, then this video is for you. I recently gave a talk on this subject to the Georgia Council for History and they recorded it, and so I thought you might benefit from it too. In the beginning of the talk, I set the stage with a story, and then secondly, I talk about why writing in the history classroom is so important, and you can find that right here at this timestamp. And third, I give some strategies that I have found helpful for including evidence-based writing in the classroom, and you can find that at this timestamp right here. I hope you enjoy it, and if you're in Georgia and want some more information on the Georgia Council for History, then the link is in the description. Thank you so much. So yes, the topic that's been assigned to me is this: inquiry-based history writing in the classroom. And I like to argue that writing is the most important thing that we teach as history educators. In order to prove that, let me try to break this talk down into three headings. First, I'm going to tell you a story. Second, I'm going to argue that writing is thinking. And then third, we're going to talk about strategies for implementing writing in our classroom. So first, let's start with a story. So it's 2 months ago. I'm with my family in Breckenridge, Colorado, and we're at the base of a mountain walking to get in line for an alpine slide. And we've been planning this trip and saving for this trip for over a year. I really wanted my kids to see the beauty of the Rocky Mountains. And so this has been really built up. And so we were in Rocky Mountain National Park for part of it, and it was great. We felt at home. But then we got to Breckenridge. And from the first moment we arrived in Breckenridge, I could tell we did not belong. You know how some families are sweet and other families are spicy? The Heimlers are definitely of the spicy persuasion. And Breckenridge, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it is not a town full of spicy people. These are people who look like they could be on magazines and their homes would be on magazines. That is not us. Everyone looks very well put together. They look like they have all their lives figured out. And because I've been saving for a long time to do this, I decided to get a nicer hotel room than we normally get. And as soon as we walk into the room, I can already tell that we don't belong. And I look at my daughter, she's standing there looking around and she's silent. She's saying nothing. And I finally ask her, like, what do you think? It's nice, right? What do you think? And she responds by saying, they should not let us stay here. Even she knew that we were not Breckenridge kind of people. Now, I'm not saying anything against Breckenridge kind of people. They're lovely people. But we were not Breckenridge kind of people. And while, you know, what she said was funny, we all kind of agreed, I knew there was some truth to it. But this is like the culmination of our trip. We're here for 4 days, and I don't want to spend it sitting in a hotel room wondering why they even let us book this place. Like, I've got to redeem this. So I go down to the front desk. I ask the guy behind the counter if there are any, you know, fun activities that we can do as a family. And he tells me that tomorrow, right at the base of the mountain, there's an entire alpine amusement park that is opening. And I say, done. That sounds great. That's going to be the thing that's going to redeem this part of our trip. We're going to ride alpine coasters, jump on trampolines. We're going to ride alpine slides, ride ski lifts to the top of the mountain. It's going to be amazing. And then nobody's going to be focused on how out of place we feel, and we'll just be having fun. To me, the entire trip depends on this day going well. And so we buy our tickets, which, to be honest, were far more expensive than I'm comfortable spending. And they come with a no return policy. You know, you get what you get for the day. And so we buy the tickets, get in line for the alpine slide. It's like a 45-minute wait, and it's out in the blazing sun. You know, we're at the base of a mountain. There's no trees around. And about 15 minutes in, my kids start to wilt. They're complaining, they're hungry, and my whole plan is falling apart. But I keep telling them, as soon as it's our turn and you get on that slide and you start screaming down the mountain, all of this is going to be worth it. And so 20 more minutes go by, and finally we're next in line. And apparently mountain weather is fickle, because from the time that we're second in line to the first in line, a storm whips up and they shut the slide down. And I'm so mad. I'm so mad at that point. But they tell us that the alpine coaster will run in the rain because it's not raining that hard. And so we decided to go over there. But the problem is that, remember, we're first in line, and the guy running the slide said that to everyone in the line. And so we ended up being last over to the coaster, which turned out to be another 45-minute wait. And the kids are seriously so tired of waiting at this point. They're cold now because they've been rained on, they're wet, and they're taking it out on me and my wife. But I tell them, just like, look at this, look, watch those coasters coming down the mountain. Look how fun that looks. Like, as soon as we get in one of those, you're going to forget about all your problems. And so we wait for another 40 minutes. And when we're almost there, a worker comes out from behind the turnstile and says, we're shutting the coaster down. There's a malfunction. Sorry, it's going to be a while. And what was supposed to be the best day ended up being the worst day. So by this point, it's lunchtime, and we leave to go get some lunch. And when we return, finally, it's sunny, like no clouds in the sky. It's beautiful. And so we get in line for that alpine slide again. And about 10 minutes in, the clouds start to gather. But it's okay. It's almost our turn. And, I'm watching the clouds and I'm praying to the good Lord in heaven to spare us a few minutes. And then at long last, it's our turn. We finally get on the ski lift. It's going to take us to the top of the slide. And I turn around right as we get on. I turn around and I see the worker turning everyone else away in the line because of weather. Like, we just made it. I can't believe it. So it's not the day we wanted. Fine. But we're going to redeem it with at least one ride. Like, and as we're going up the mountain, it's my kid's first time on a ski lift, and it's thrilling. Everyone is smiling. Nobody is thinking about how we don't belong here. But and about halfway up, though, I felt a drop of rain, which, that's fine, no problem. But then there was another, and then there was another, and then a few hundred feet more up the mountain, the rain is now turned to ice, and the high winds are throwing these icy drops against our skin at terrific speeds. And I can't believe it. And instead of smiling, everyone is now screaming because it's June and we are not dressed for freezing rain and 30-mile-an-hour winds. When we finally made it to the top, the worker told us they're shutting down the slide. They drive us back down in a van. And I cannot even begin to tell you how mad I was, but mostly I was deeply disappointed. So we walked back down to our room, wet and cold and disheveled. And I sat at the table, desperately searching through my phone for an activity that we could do tomorrow to redeem what was supposed to be the redemption. And that's when my 10-year-old daughter sits down right opposite to me, puts her hand on my arm, and says, Dad, that was an epic failure. But you know what? I actually think it was a pretty good day because we got to do it all together. And what my daughter taught me in that moment is something I could never have come to on my own. She taught me that struggle doesn't cancel out redemption. Instead, struggle is the path to redemption, all from a 10-year-old. So now let's move on to the second point, which is writing is thinking. What's the point of that story? What's the point? The point is, writing, in my humble opinion, is the most important skill we're going to teach our students. But it's also the hardest skill we're going to teach our students. If my experience is any indicator, then writing is going to be the place where their struggle is the fiercest. And it's in writing that they're going to be tempted to believe that the struggle has no redemptive merit to it. But if we are able to teach them how to write well, then the struggle is the only path to redemption. Now, let me explain myself with something that to me is axiomatic, namely that writing is thinking and thinking is writing. And I'm sure that, many smart people have said that, some version of that, but I learned it from the German social theorist Niklas Luhmann. And he argued that that there is no possibility of sustaining complex thoughts within your own mind. The brain can hold together simple thoughts, but it breaks down under exhaustion when it attempts complex thoughts internally. Therefore, if a human being in this age at least, is going to sustain complex thought, it must occur extrinsically, not intrinsically. And the medium through which those complex thoughts are going to be developed is writing. And that means when we teach our students to write, we are teaching them how to think. And more to the point, when we teach them how to write, we are teaching them how to think in more complex manners than are possible inside the brain. So writing is thinking, and complex thinking can only happen outside the brain. But teaching them to do that is going to hurt, and they're going to struggle with it. And if you've been teaching for more than 5 minutes, and I assume that you have, you know this already. But consider this: they're not struggling to write, they're struggling to think. And that struggle, I have to keep reminding my students, is worth it. There is redemption at the end of that struggle. I tell them to consider what they'll be capable of if they are able to think well, and to consider how few people are able, seemingly, to think well in our society. Like, consider, I mean, the billions of dollars that are spent on political advertising, all of which assumes that we are not rational creatures by nature who can weigh the relative merits of candidates and make a good decision based on reason. Instead, they assume that we're nothing but primal creatures that can be controlled and cajoled by fear and intimidation. Like, if you can think, those kinds of manipulations won't find any purchase in you. Or think about the cable news pundits who weave together incredibly simplified narratives about how things are in the world and how things ought to be. Like, we know that those narratives have consequences, but if you learn to think, then they won't fall prey. You won't fall prey to those kind of malignant doofuses. And so what we are in desperate need of in this world are people who are capable of thinking. And the only way they're going to learn how to think, if Nicholas Luhmann is to be believed, is to learn how to write. So, we're all social studies teachers. And that means we not only want to teach our students how to think, but every discipline has embedded within it a unique way of thinking and understanding the world. And for us, we want our students to learn how to think historically. We want them to understand what it means to reason chronologically and build historical arguments based on evidence. And we have to teach them how to do this, if only because they are flooded day in and day out with bad historical arguments. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that the struggle intrinsic to writing is worth it in the end. This is a redemptive struggle. But I also know that teaching students how to write, and how to write well, more to the point, is a task that is being steadily, marginalized by state testing and the increasing crush of content that needs to be taught, and the seemingly insurmountable obstacle that we're all facing of student lethargy. So how are we supposed to meaningfully integrate writing into our courses? And so for that, let's consider some strategies. First, indulge me if you will, to clear away a misunderstanding. Like, in my mind, there is a false dichotomy between learning the content of the course and implementing writing. And if we're not careful, we can slip into seeing content and writing as two separate tasks. On day one, students need to learn about the Monroe Doctrine, or Simon Bolivar's letter to Jamaica, or Louis XIV's Wars of Expansion, or whatever. And then on another day, they need to learn how to write theses or topic sentences or evidence analysis. And let's be honest, in that scheme that I just laid out, there are certainly not enough days to meaningfully integrate writing into our courses. But the dividing line between, at least as I see it, the dividing line between historical content and writing skills is an illusion. Remember, writing is thinking, which means that writing is also learning. Now, earlier this year, I read an excellent book. I should have brought it up here with me. By Sanka Arens, called How to Take Smart Notes. It's well-researched, evidence-based. And he said something that arrested me. He said that our brains deliver the same emotional response. Listen to this. Our brains deliver the same emotional response to repeated recognition as it does to actual learning. In other words, When we are presented with an idea that we have seen before, the mere recognition of it makes us feel as if we had actually learned it, when in reality, we are only recognizing it. And so the great danger here is feeling smarter without actually becoming smarter. Therefore, to give ourselves to the struggle of writing forces us to learn the material instead of merely recognizing it. So, my first suggestion for integrating writing in the classroom is this: use writing as the means by which students learn the content, not only the demonstration that they have already learned the content. Let me say that again, because I don't have it on the screen. That we must use writing as the means by which the students learn the content, not only the demonstration that they have already learned the content. So for me, that meant that my students were writing nearly every day they were in my classroom. It might be something short, or it might be a complete timed essay, or anything in between. But anytime I introduce them to new content, I have them writing about it. And probably if you go poll my past students, ask them about my class, they would say there is so much writing. And if you walked by my classroom on any given day, you'd probably hear the great weeping and gnashing of teeth over writing yet again. But do you know what that sound indicates? That sound indicates learning. That's what learning sounds like. Like if I lectured for 4 days on the Constitutional Convention, I think I could do a pretty good job of that. They'd be maybe they'd be entertained, and maybe they'd even feel like they learned something, because they hear me and they hear me endlessly repeating words like federalist and anti-federalist and compromise or whatever. They may even come up to me afterwards and tell me that they had a great time and they learned a lot. But what's going to happen when they go home and sit around the dinner table, right? I mean, if you have kids, you know this, or you don't even have to have kids to know this. Their parents are going to ask them, yeah, how was your day? They're going to say, Mr. Heimler's class was great. Oh, yeah. What did he teach you? Well, he talked about the Constitutional Convention and the Federalists. Oh, yeah? Who are the Federalists? I mean, the Federalists, that's kind of how it goes. Therefore, that always brings me back to that magnificent phrase, which we can never forget, that came from Terry Doyle, the education researcher. Terry Doyle, is that the one who does the work does the learning. That's as clear as it gets. The one who does the work does the learning. And if my students aren't struggling, they're not doing the work. And if they're not doing the work, they're not learning. So I would suggest that the more writing you can include, the better. And writing as a method of learning the content is wonderful. And this can be done in a couple of ways. The first, you actually already know, we all do this. Give them a prompt, have them write about it. I've only ever taught AP history, so we've got the short answer questions and the long essay questions and the document-based questions. But whatever your situation, I'm sure you have more than enough writing prompts for your students, even if they come out of your textbooks. The second strategy I stumbled upon by accident, and you may think I'm crazy. That's fine. That's fine. You may think I'm crazy, but hear me out. I have my students summarize all the content of the course in their own words by hand. Now, this does two things. First, it helps them learn the content of the course far better than any method I've ever seen or tried. Most of what is learned, with flashcards or watching videos or reading books is gone, this, as soon as they turn in the test. And I assume this is self-evident among us teachers, and I don't have to prove this, but I require them to summarize their textbook reading, summarize their video watching, summarize my lectures, summarize class activities, summarize everything. And here's where they always think I'm crazy, and maybe you think I'm crazy too, but I make them write those summaries, excuse me, longhand. Excuse me. Now I do that. I make them do it longhand, even though we teachers love our technology. I make them do it longhand because of a magnificent study that I read a couple of years ago from two researchers named Pam Mueller, Daniel Oppenheimer. It's called "The Pen is Mightier Than the Keyboard." It's magnificent. And if you talk about note taking in class, the general wisdom from teachers, professors, whatever, is that when students have laptops in class, it's bad because they can be very distracting. That's the reason why they're bad, is because they've got the Twitters coming in, and I don't know, kids don't use Twitter, whatever. They've got all the notifications, and it's distracting. But in this study, they gave students laptops whose only function was to take notes. Like everything else, they disabled. And they gave two groups a lecture. One group took notes on laptops, the other took notes by hand. Then they measured the amount of verbatim overlap between the notes and the lecture script. And not surprisingly, the laptop students had a lot more verbatim notes than did the longhand students, because obviously we can type faster than we can write by hand. But the shocking thing is that when the researchers assessed the learning that had occurred between the two groups, the longhand students positively destroyed the laptop students. And why? It's because with the constraints of longhand writing, namely that it takes much longer, the students were forced to put those ideas of the lecture into their own words, and that work that they had to do led to lasting learning. So I have found no better way to help my students learn the content than by requiring them to summarize by hand in their own words dang near everything that we do in class. So it helps them learn the material, but that work actually has another benefit. If you do any kind of DBQ or document analysis in your classroom, then you know that one of the most difficult things to get students to do is to argue with documents, like argue with them instead of merely quoting them. And I think at least part of the reason is that they have no experience reading something and then summarizing it in their own words in an intelligent fashion. But if they spend every day in my classroom doing it, the results on the DBQ or document analysis or whatever they're doing, I'm telling you, are magnificent. It really helps. Okay, now close parenthesis. Perhaps all that felt tangential, but I think it was very important. Regardless, now let's get to some strategies for implementing more formal writing. Those are more informal things, writing strategies, but let's talk about more formal strategies for historical writing in the classroom. And the truth is, I am no innovator here. Like, I only know the basics, but sometimes, the basics are, that which we need to return to. So if we're going to teach our students how to think by writing, then there needs to be a very clear path for them to learn the basics of argumentative prose. And since I've always taught AP, I'll speak from my experience, and hopefully this will be generalizable to your classroom. So in my first 3 years of teaching, I introduced the document-based question on week 2 of class. I did that on the reasoning that it's the hardest essay that they're going to be expected to write, and they might as well get started early so they have plenty of time to practice. But, in a document-based question, there are many skills, many different skills that are necessary in order to score well on that essay, and explaining them all at once to my students led them to some serious stress. And, when I explained this to them, they looked like me when someone is trying to explain to me the rules of a card game. Like, I don't care if Cicero has put these rules into a speech that is the height of rhetorical beauty. I will not understand them. I don't know why. Inevitably, I just say, can we just play? Let's play and explain it to me as we go. That, for some reason, that's way easier for me than learning the rules all up front. So later, I decided to adopt the wisdom of scaffolding. So instead of introducing this very difficult essay in week 2, I adopted the wisdom of scaffolding when I taught writing. And after that, things actually got much better. So I began with the absolute basics of historical writing. I asked myself, what is the absolute minimum bar that my students need to reach in order to successfully think and write historically? And I decided that bar was a single evidence-based paragraph that supports an argument. So that means I began teaching my students how to use evidence to argue. That was the very first thing I did. And listen, if you tuned out prior to this, then tune back in, because what I'm about to say changed the way I taught writing and thought about it. I realized I've got to teach them how to argue with evidence. And it was a revelation to me to realize that my students already knew how to argue with evidence. A student brings in a doctor's note and says that she'd like to take the test that she missed tomorrow. She's making an argument with evidence, right? The evidence is the doctor's note. The claim is that she should be able to take the test tomorrow. When my oldest son was 7 or 8, he asked me if he could listen to Billie Eilish. I at that point I was a 38-year-old man. I didn't know anything about Billie Eilish. So I asked my students one day, hey, should I let my 8-year-old listen to Billie Eilish? And some of them said yes, and some of them said no. And then I told them to tell me why. And the arguments that they were able to muster on a moment's notice were, some of them pretty sophisticated. And so I realized that the more that I can show them that they already know how to perform the skills of this course apart from the content of the course, the better they're going to do when it comes time to argue with the content of the course. And so that means I spend a disproportionate amount of time on activities that require them to argue, but have nothing to do with the content of the course. I have found that to be an incredibly rich strategy for teaching them how to argue with evidence. So I start with evidence-based paragraphs, and then I teach them how to write a topic sentence, which, if they've been doing their summary work that I just spent all that time talking about, that's a breeze. They already know how to do that. And then I teach them how to name evidence and then how to analyze it in support of a topic sentence, which again, the summary work has been preparing them for. So after that, I spent a lot of time on the thesis and then document analysis. And, that whole process takes me about a semester. But by the time we start spring semester, they have all the skills they need to write a solid DBQ. And I've found that kind of scaffolding, even though it is a heavier lift for me as the teacher, I'd rather just get it out of the way, just dump the DBQ on them and let's power through. I've found, even though it's a heavier lift for me, it actually serves the students much better in the long run. And, what am I there for if not to serve them well? So that scaffolding framework, even though it is about one of the most basic things we teachers learn, I found it incredibly helpful. So in the end, writing in the history classroom is under assault, from standardized testing and the lethargy that the students have built up over the last 3 years, and from a dozen other factors as well. But what I hope that you've seen tonight is that whatever struggle ensues as we try to teach our students to think by writing is a redemptive struggle. Even if you as the teacher are the only one who can see that one day your students are going to sit across the table from you, like my daughter sat across the table from me that night in Colorado, and say, you know what? The struggle was worth it. So thank you very much.